Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another one of our weekly webinars. Today's webinar, as Scott pointed out, is What's New in Autodesk InfraWorks 360. Today's agenda is sort of a little bit all over the place because most of what was introduced in InfraWorks 360 covers a lot of different areas. It covers a lot of different disciplines from architecture to engineering. So I'm going to go flying in and out of a PowerPoint slide as well as show you some of the functionality on these What's New features in InfraWorks and in certain instances other products such as Civil 3D or Revit, et cetera. Depends on what's needed. All right. So let's go ahead and just start with an overview of InfraWorks. And again, I'm going to go on the assumption that perhaps some of you are watching what InfraWorks is about in terms of an application for the first time. So one of the first major distinctions is there are two versions of the product. I'll be sure to pull up a comparison matrix shortly and show you how to access that. But we'll start with InfraWorks 360 LT, and this is the one that comes with some of the suites, the Infrastructure Design Suite Premium and Ultimate, as well as the Building Design Suite Ultimate, as well as something that you can purchase on your own. Now, the purpose behind InfraWorks 360 LT is the ability to conceptualize projects at a very early stage, whether they be architectural or engineering related. So you'll be able to aggregate data from GIS sources that you download and find on your own from various authoring applications like Civil 3D and Revit and things like that. You'll also be able to sketch your own design. So again, whether you're talking about a road or an area for study, you can use the sketch tools inside of InfraWorks 360, similar to the ones you'll see shortly, without requiring the full version of InfraWorks 360. Creating storyboards, the ability to tell a story based on the project or the design concepts that you're coming up with is available in 360 as well, as is much of the other core functionality, everything from style rules to rendering to things like that. On the other hand, you have InfraWorks 360. And I know the names are very similar, the only difference being the LT at the end. But on top of all the InfraWorks 360 LT features, you get a few more things, namely the access to Model Builder. Model Builder being one of InfraWorks 360's probably the most powerful features. It allows you to aggregate data pretty much from anywhere in the world these days. I'll show you the limits of where you can access data, and it'll pull in geospatial information files based on terrain data, based on ortho imagery, based on roads, buildings, bodies of water, et cetera. So extremely powerful for getting up and running with the concept without too much effort on your part. The ability to collaborate online via the InfraWorks 360 portal and share concepts online with stakeholders that may not have access to InfraWorks 360 as software. You'll be able to go ahead and demonstrate some of what you've created, some of the concepts you're looking at online, shareable with anybody. And then last but not least, simulation and analysis. There's a ton of different features, some of them built into InfraWorks, some of them what they're calling technology previews. And I'll do a short bit on explaining a little bit about what some of those are and what some of them do. That a portion of them consume cloud credits, and there are a few that are free because they're technology previews. But I'll go into a little bit more detail once we get into InfraWorks. And then probably the second most important feature for InfraWorks 360 as opposed to LT is the ability to add on the vertical applications. Now there's three main verticals, the roadway design module, the bridge design module, and the drainage design module. And they're all geared more towards engineering applications, but in certain instances, primarily what I would say with the roadway module, you can certainly use it for architectural applications as well. Each of those have a very specific task that they accomplish. The roadway module being able to engineer roadways, both from an engineering perspective, being able to set an alignment, being able to set a profile, as well as structural engineering for the bridge, being able to model a bridge based on a particular girder type, use some abutment objects that have been developed inside of a vendor, et cetera. And then last but not least, drainage design, which would probably interest nobody but a civil engineer. Those allow you to create some conceptual layouts for drainage utilities, such as storm and sanitary. Now, what I do want to pull up real quick is the comparison matrix. Again, this is both on our website and on Autodesk's website, but if you want a little bit more further detail into some of the features, the nitty-gritty of what's included in one versus another, be sure to just Google InfraWorks 360 comparison matrix, and you'll see that this is one of the first hits you'll get. If you have any questions regarding sales and the pricing of that, Scott will be more than happy to answer some of those for you. Now, with regards to just some more general overview of InfraWorks 360, previously it's been quite difficult for users to experience InfraWorks 360 on a trial basis. Part of the reason why is that it's heavily dependent on the login when you first sign up. So the first thing you do when you launch InfraWorks 360 is you sign in using your Autodesk account. Now, if you're brand new to Autodesk products, which would be shocking, but if you're brand new and you don't have an account login, you'd have to go through the trouble of doing that, and it makes the trial experience a little bit less straightforward than it needs to be. So most of that has been rectified, and now if you feel like taking a spin of InfraWorks 360 and checking out some of the functionality, you can go ahead and do that. And after the 30-day trial, it'll enter into presenter mode, similar to Autodesk Revit, for those of you familiar with that product, in which case you can open up and view models, but you won't be able to edit or make any changes to your existing. All right, so let's talk about probably one of the first new features. There was, and actually I'll make a quick side note right now. There are new releases for every Autodesk product, as you've seen some of us do presentations over the last couple of months. Myself, I just did one for Civil 3D last week. InfraWorks is a little bit different animal in the sense that the InfraWorks 360 2016 version that came out in March/April is most of the features that I'm going to show today, but there was a June 2015 release, which I'll be working with primarily, that included a whole bunch of new functionality. Now, those of you familiar with the product will probably realize that that's generally been Autodesk's approach to the way it makes changes to InfraWorks as a software. Last year, there were 3 releases, a .1, .2, .3, all of which included new functionality and on top of addressing any issues that would have come up. And it seems like it's going to be the same here for InfraWorks 360 2016. So a lot of the new features were just new features that were part of the initial release. So if you just installed InfraWorks back in March or April, and you haven't really run any updates via the Autodesk Application Manager, you'll be running with the stock version of that. There are going to be some new features, including the Model Builder window that I'm about to show you that had some cosmetic changes, but also included some additional functionality. And I've relegated some of those, what I'll call last-minute updates to the June release at the end. And I have a couple of slides to just address those, and I'll show you where you can learn more about those, since in the span of an hour I won't be able to cover everything. But with regards to Model Builder specifically, the slide that you're seeing up at the splash screen right now, there's a bunch of new things that have been added aside from an aesthetic overview, and I'll show you that shortly. But you'll see that now there's access to global content. So previous versions of InfraWorks, you were pretty much relegated to working within the continental US. Now if you actually pull up the Model Builder, which I'll do shortly, you'll see that pretty much most areas of the world have data that you can access, whether they be simply terrain models, building information, roadways, aerial photography, etc. The ability to import a new high-quality aerial photography and terrain when it's available is also a new feature. You'll see that there is a little setting that you can toggle when you're in when you've imported information in from Model Builder that allows you to refine the information. So in the case of an aerial photograph, or an ortho photograph is what I should say, you'll see that you can control the resolution, so the pixels per square foot or per square meter. Now, again, this is only being based on the availability of that information being accessed. So if you're in a remote area or an area where there isn't high-resolution aerial photography, you'll be stuck with whatever you can get. The ability to model irregular polygons and corridors within Model Builder is a new feature. So rather than simply relegating your model space to be a rectangle or a particular view, you can now actually trace out a corridor shape. So for instance, you'll see that I went out and I did a polygon for the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, and I was able to bring in just the information within that, and I'll show you a demonstration of that. And last but not least, the ability to select an area by importing a shapefile. Now, a shapefile, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, is a Esri proprietary file format. Usually has the extension .shp, and it is two-dimensional or geospatial information. So it either can include point information, line information, or polygon information. And I'll spend a little time just explaining that for those of you who may be new to either InfraWorks or geospatial data. So if I fire up InfraWorks, just to give you a quick overview of the new interface, hasn't been changed too much, but just taking you through a quick tour, you'll see you'll have access to your login information on the top left, as well as a full screen and the help on the upper right. You'll have access to jumping back to a model using that icon. So the last previous model that you were in, you can immediately jump back to. Those of you who don't know InfraWorks, this software is built on a SQLite backend, so there's no saving. You can jump in and out of projects, and any changes you've made up to that point get saved. There is a home icon where you can go ahead and manage your subscription, manage your online models and scenarios, as well as any group members that you might like to invite to share or view your information. Here on each of these tiles, you see a quick little view of the various models that I've worked with in InfraWorks, and you have the ability to filter out based on date, name, author, etc. Now, specifically Model Builder, and if you don't see it right away, you'll have to go ahead and click this icon. You'll see that Model Builder now appears along with the new and the ability to open up a specific model. If I go ahead and I choose Model Builder, I'm going to bring up and maximize that window, and you'll see that once it loads, oh, that's lovely. Let's try that again. Let's go ahead and bring up Model Builder, and that would be, there we go. Not sure what the hiccup was, but you'll see that here you have a Bing's map view of pretty much the entire planet. Certain areas are off limits, meaning that I don't think they're literally off limits. There's just no information there to be seen. Pretty much north of whatever this latitude is, just just north of Oslo, Norway. It's really not much information except what I would assume is the Alaskan oil fields. So if you're doing any work in Alaska, you probably have a little bit more luck than anybody doing work in northern Scandinavia or Russia. But anywhere else in the world, from Brazil to the United States, Africa, Australia, wherever it is you're doing work or you're conceptualizing a project, you can go ahead and pull information from that location. Now on the right-hand side here, you can see the different ways you can access that information. I can start by typing in a location. So if I go ahead and I type in Brooklyn, New York, it'll zoom me into that area. And then you have a few ways that you can access the information. The new feature is the ability to select via polygon, right? So I'm not going to go ahead and create a new model, but you just simply have to select that view, and you can start tracing out a shape of what it is you'd like to model. Now, you have up to 200 square kilometers of data that you can import in. That's a pretty significant amount of data. All right, so you see that I've done this, and then I can just close it up, and I would be able to import in that information. All right. The other option would be a shapefile, right? I don't have access to a shapefile, but if you had an Esri boundary file that you wanted that would contain the information you'd want, you can simply use that, browse that shapefile, and go ahead and import that in via the shapefile itself. Now, the types of information are located here: roads, buildings, imagery, elevation, and then you would enter in a model name for that model and assign it to a group that you'd like. Now, I did this a little bit beforehand. So if I simply look for BQE, right, you'll see an example of a model that I pulled in via the model builder that used a polygon shape to access that information. Right? So you can see I have the whole stretch of the BQE from north to, or from south to north. So there's Red Hook, downtown Brooklyn, up into Queens, ending on the northernmost extension. All right, and the kinds of information when available that were brought in are roads, buildings, bodies of water. If I scroll down here, assuming that's the East River, or one of the viaducts, East River, and then out to the Atlantic as you get closer to the Verrazano. All right, so that's Model Builder. And I'll go ahead and I'll go back. Let me close out my filter, and let's go over to some of the new features. Some of the new usability improvements, again, this is just, this is not going to sound too exciting, but it's actually really nice little features that they've added to the newest iteration of InfraWorks 360, the ability to store models on a shared network drive while creating a local tile cache. What that indicates is that typically in previous versions of InfraWorks, you were effectively working in your model, and most of the time you were working on your local hard drive. Now, the reason being that most of the SQLite information that gets stored for that is there's a ton of files that get written constantly. Now, if that's stored on a network location, you can experience some degradation in performance. And if there are many people using InfraWorks models on a shared network, it could create latency issues, it could create bandwidth issues. Now, one of the newer features is the ability to create a local tile cache. Now, if I just jump into InfraWorks real quick, and let me just go back to our BQE model, right? And I bring up some of the options associated with InfraWorks, you'll see that regardless of where my information is stored, I have a local tile cache. So anything that needs to be cached for my view for that model gets stored locally here on, and you can see it's under C users, my local app data local folder. All right, so it allows you to work on the network, caching information locally to improve performance. The ability to view published model information on the web interface with various scenarios has been improved. So previously it took a while, and you see that one of the other bullets is the streamlining process of web mobile syncing to generate scenarios. Some of that syncing took very long amounts of time. So you'd have to kind of walk away and not leave your project to the last minute to upload if you wanted to share it. There have been vast improvements in the way that information gets uploaded so that the process is a lot more seamless. I'm going to go ahead and just pull up on my second monitor the InfraWorks 360 Autodesk portal. Of course, you need to be logged in via your Autodesk account, but you'll see that you'll be able to upload a scenario, and once you pick on it, very quick to access information regarding some of the different scenarios that you may have chosen to display online. So here I'm choosing a very simple example so as not to spend too much time waiting for the model to regenerate. But again, just via Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, or Microsoft Edge if you're in Windows 10, you can have access to a lot of these different scenarios online and not have the overhead of either bringing a laptop or a thumb drive with the information on it and require software at a presentation location. All right, so go ahead and close that up. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. Now, some of the more, what I'd call relatively exciting things in the sense that they're more hands-on, start here with the modeling enhancements. There's three here that I'll go ahead and I'll illustrate. Some of them cover topics that are probably outside the extent of what most people on a day-to-day basis deal with, especially depending on your profession, but I'll be sure to just talk a little bit about all three to give you a nice general overview. Point cloud information can be now themed, and there's improved analysis for the way that information gets visualized inside of InfraWorks 360. You'll see that via the interface, and let me go ahead and bring up InfraWorks real quick. I'm going to bring in a model that I know I was working with earlier, and let's sort that by date. And we'll go over here to this model called White Plains that I pulled in via Model Builder. You'll see here an example of a point cloud that I brought in. Now, I'll talk a little bit about how I brought that information. Most of what you're seeing here is from the Model Builder. However, if I simply go in here and let's toggle off a few surface layers, right? Actually, I'm sorry, I want to toggle off. Let's see, turn off buildings for now, right? You can see here now an example of the point cloud. Now, this point cloud, if you're bringing information into InfraWorks via the data sources, you'll see that one of the options would be point cloud. And if you select that, you'll be looking for a RCP or RCS file. Now, those are recap files. So if you were to go out and look for information, laser scans that you might pull from online or have access to via a subconsultant, or within your own firm you have a laser scanning group, you'd have to process that information inside of recap. Now, what I've done is I've simply made that model by importing in a LAS file. Now, that LAS file was something I simply got online, so let me go ahead and just pull that information up for you, just to give you a very quick overview of how easy this is if you have access to that type of information. I'm going to go ahead and just go to the Westchester GIS website. And you'll see that if I select search, and Google does not want to cooperate, if I select search, the first hit is the Westchester County GIS website. You'll see that if you go to the data warehouse, you'll have access to the LiDAR. And if you look down at the bottom, they give you explanations of how to access that information. So by simply going to their interactive GIS portal, I'm going to go ahead and just toggle the show additional information, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you that if I go to the environmental features and access LiDAR, right, I'm going to have some tiles for that information, and if I simply go and locate white plains, and I zoom into a particular area, you'll see that there is tiles associated with that LiDAR data. So by clicking the information icon, and again, every web portal for geospatial information is going to be different, but generally speaking, this is the way that most of them operate. I'd pick an information icon, and I simply choose the tile that I'd like, and I have access to download that information. Now, if I were to show you what that looks like locally, right, you'll see that I have a file here called name of the tile.las. I took that information into Recap by creating a new project and importing that in, and this is what I got. And you'll see that the information here in Recap shows you buildings, information about roads and trees, et cetera, whatever was picked up by that laser scan. And then once that was generated via and saved as a Recap file, that RCP file, all I had to do was drag and drop it into InfraWorks. All right. Now, specifically, some of the theming that you'd like to see is located in your main InfraWorks feature right up here in the analysis tool, and you'll see that there is a point cloud theme where I can set a theme based on a particular property type. So in this case, if I created a theme based on elevations, it would set elevations or set colors based on elevations, and I can set whatever range I want. It's probably picking up the minimum and maximum, so there might be a straight point up at the top, 696 in the air, but if I go down to maybe 400 and rerun that, you can see that the theming is taking place in real time. All right. So find some laser scans, bring them into Recap, process them, push them into InfraWorks, and you can theme them as much as you'd like, as well as integrate that into the rest of the other model elements that you may want to show. So you can see here that I can flesh out additional buildings. You can see down here that there's a building that wasn't picked up via geospatial information. So this helps sort of give you a little bit more information and insight into what you have in your project zone. All right. Collada models are the next new feature, and these are moving parts. Let me back that up. I jumped way too quick into that. Collada is a particular file type, has the extension .dae, and it's used in a lot of different 3D and animation authoring softwares like SketchUp and 3ds Max Design and 3ds Max. Now, one of the features of a Collada model is the ability to imprint animation information in there as well. So one of the new features of InfraWorks 360 is the ability to add, if I were to go here into a model, and let me go to the tutorial file, you'll see that one of the new, what they call city furniture objects that they've brought in is the ability to add a city furniture element that has animation. So if I were to go here and bring in a windmill, right, you can see a wind turbine and animated. It has this little icon. It indicates that information is has animation, right? So you can now create a little something that has a little bit more depth, a little more realism to it. Right now, my model is running pretty bare bones in terms of graphics, but if I turn on shadows and ambient occlusion, you can see that this starts looking a little bit more interesting, right? And if I were to edit that and rotate it, you can see based on my shadow, right, it creates a little more sense of realism if you're trying to talk about a particular project. Now, if those of you who are a little bit more inclined to create your own animations, I came up with something silly as an example, but you'll see that if I bring in a model that I brought in, I can do that very simply. So I figured, thinking of roads and being an engineer and coming up with a corny joke, I thought of the chicken crossing the road. So of course I went and I found a chicken model that somebody went and put into SketchUp. So what I was able to do was fire up 3ds Max 2016, and you'll see here I have this chicken.dae or a SketchUp file somewhere that I brought in. Now effectively, and if 3ds Max Design doesn't take too much longer to load, what I wanted to show you is it's quite easy to go in there and animate that object using just some simple animation tools, essentially the auto key feature inside of 3ds Max, right? So if I were to go ahead and import in that feature, let's go ahead and close that. If I go ahead and simply select import and I go to my desktop, I have this chicken.dae. Go ahead and I open that up. You'll see that animation is part of that. I don't have anything currently, but there's my chicken, right? Something very silly, very simple, but it gives you a point. I can simply select the entire object, turn on auto key, slide over that information, and use the move icon to key in the next location of that object, and then uncheck auto key, and hitting play would give you some sort of animation. Now, this can be any sort of linear or relatively simple animation, and what you end up with is if I simply brought in that animated object, right? Bear with me, I'll just point out that when you are exporting from 3ds Max Design and you do choose the Collada file type, that one of the things you can choose to save, let me just give this a name, is the ability to export out that animation. So when I go to InfraWorks, I can simply drag and drop a file that has animation features into InfraWorks, and I'll add this as city furniture. And you can see you can pretty much do anything you'd like in terms of creating something that is worthwhile. Right? So there's my chicken. Now, I tried this with a lot more complex geometry. I modeled a cloth object inside of 3ds Max Design to simulate a flag waving. Didn't really. I deleted the chicken. Roger was just asking. I tried modeling something a little bit more complex, and that didn't pan out so well. So just go with very simple linear animations. If you're going to use some of the Collada files, you'll see that in the case of the wind turbine, just a very simple motion. The best thing to do is do something that's cyclical or looping, so that you don't have this very staccato break to the animation. All right. And then last but not least, in terms of the modeling improvements, you have enhanced Revit interoperability that allows you to bring in materials that you've mapped inside of Revit. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and just launch my universal search. I'm going to go ahead and find the sample file for the Revit architectural models, right? So if I go to 2016, there's my Revit basic sample project file. Just simply drag and drop that into InfraWorks. And you'll see that it's going to process, and it's going to say connecting to data sources. While this does this, I'll point out that if you do have InfraWorks 360 and you also have Navisworks 2016 installed, there's an option to translate that information locally. If you don't have access to Navisworks, the example being that you don't own the product or you don't own a suite, what ends up happening is that InfraWorks pushes out the Revit model to the cloud, and it translates that information on their servers. All right, so what you're seeing here is it's going ahead and it's generating that information. Should be ready in a couple of minutes. You'll see here that now I can go ahead and just simply look at that 3D model. There it is, right? All the materials that were modeled inside of Revit are in there. If I go ahead and I set this to just the center 2D and use interactive placing, I can go ahead and drop that in, close and refresh, and you'll see my Revit model in there. So again, very easy to do. I'm giving you a very straightforward example, but any of the model information that you've brought in terms of materials will come in with your model. So you can use the model builder to bring in a project site and use Revit to model all your information, bring that into InfraWorks, and use this to tell a story about either a design option or what it is that you're proposing for a project. All right. Now, and the next group of slides really has to do with the way that Civil 3D interacts with InfraWorks. And there's been a lot of new development in the way that process works. In previous iterations, and this is more towards the civil engineering attendees, in previous iterations, bringing back and forth information into Civil 3D was a little bit more manual, in the sense that you were using either an IMX file format or a land XML or even just simple Civil 3D files to bring in data back and forth, and you lost a little bit of that connectivity. So now you have the ability to open up InfraWorks models within Civil 3D, and if you've modeled additional data, so in the case of design roads, intersection coverages, bridges, or pipe networks, you can bring in that information directly into Civil 3D. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring information in, and I'm going to go ahead and just try to go ahead and find my bridge model. So let's go ahead and see if I can bring in this model right here. All right, so I'm going to fire up a model, and I'm going to go ahead and do a bridge layout. And you can see here there's been a design road that's been accessed, and there's some information about the type of bridge that's in there we'll get to shortly. But effectively, if I wanted to bring in this sort of information into Civil 3D after having modeled it in InfraWorks, I can do that, right? So if I just take a quick look, I just want to ensure that my model properties, let me bring that up. And why am I not seeing that? Because I'm in the wrong thing. There we go. LL84. All right. Should be able to bring in this model. If not, I'll try to give you an example of another one. If I launch Civil 3D in the background and fire it up, this is the Civil 3D interface. Inside the Insert tab, and again, just bear in mind, this is Civil 3D 2016, you now have the ability to import in the InfraWorks 360 models. So you'll see that there's this new icon right here in your Insert tab, and allowing you to simply import that in by left-clicking. So you'll see that when I left-click, I either can open up an InfraWorks 360 model or configure how I want the exchange settings to be set so that when I do bring information, certain properties are added to those models. All you have to do is typically select the Open InfraWorks 360 model, and you'll see here that you're given this dialog window where you can simply browse out to a location for your SQLite file. Now, in this case, my file is stored locally on my documents, Autodesk InfraWorks 360 models. Now, bear in mind, I'm going to bring up one quick thing before I do, because as I was just experimenting with this new feature, I did run into some issues that weren't, I suppose if I had read the help menu, which I never do, I might have seen this, but I'm giving you a fair word of caution. If you're bringing in information from Model Builder, there's an issue with bringing in InfraWorks models that are created with a lat-long, so a latitude-longitude coordinate system, because Civil 3D does not support that. So oftentimes what will happen is if I go ahead and I select a file that has that, right, I'll give you an example of that. You'd see that bridge design, right? You'll see that if I simply try to use the coordinate system for that model, it won't accept it, right? And if I try to set a coordinate system for the drawing, let me try the Universal Transmercator system. That should probably be just like that. Even if I do that, I'll get a message saying that the coordinate system is not compatible. All right, so just be careful when you do that. If you do build a model from scratch, as would be the case here, I'll bring up an example of geospatial. Where's my InfraWorks models? And I bring up this White Plains high resolution file that I modeled locally. You'll see that everything pans out correctly. Now, at this point, I can go ahead and if I had information in this drawing, I could choose which objects to bring in. I can refine my selection set by choosing an area of that model, right? So if I select that, and sometimes it does take a long time, so I won't spend too much time here. But if by the time the webinar is over, I have a little more time, I'll give you a little more in-depth in here. Effectively, you can go ahead and refine your selection set to bring in just the information you want. And you can see here that there's a section for either bringing in the entire extent of the InfraWorks 360 model or a particular area of interest, all right? Likewise, inside of InfraWorks 360, you can attach your Civil 3D design files. So if I go into InfraWorks, you'll see that in my data sources, I can go ahead and attach an AutoCAD Civil 3D DWG file. And if I were to bring up anything information-wise in there, right, I'm just going to select a file to just show you the sorts of things that happen. InfraWorks 360 will process that information. It'll analyze the information in there. You can see that it's finding some road information based off a corridor, some existing surface models, some pipe networks, and you can choose what it is you'd like to include or not include in your import. The nice thing is, as you make changes to those models, all you have to do is refresh your view inside of InfraWorks 360, and you'll see that a lot of that will take place. All right. So the last little bit, as I pointed out earlier, the data stays linked in between both applications, so it makes it easier to make changes in one and see the updates in the other. The setting configurations can be set and reused. That was referring to the Civil 3D resource settings that I was pointing out earlier. Now, unfortunately, Civil 3D is locked up because it's trying to access the information on that model that I suggested earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and relaunch it and just point out where that is. And if I swing that over to my desktop, any day now. There we go. I'll just point out where that is. Let's close that up. And again, under the insert, you could choose the Configure InfraWorks 360 Civil 3D Data Exchange, and you can tell it how you want things to appear, what style things should be on, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole help document that details out how Civil 3D imports and InfraWorks information and vice versa. So be sure to check out the help menu and be sure to check out how the information gets exchanged. And again, if there's any questions about what gets mapped to, which object in InfraWorks 360 gets mapped to which object in Civil 3D, be sure to let me know, and I'll spend a little time discussing that offline or via email. All right, a couple of new features, some for improved intersection design. One of them, which is quite nice, is the ability to set up model interchanges with the support for uninterrupted traffic flows. So think of situations where, again, if those of you who might be located in New York City, think about the West Side Highway where you have a median that spans the entire span of the interchange. Now, certain cross streets allow you to make left and right turns. Others have that median in the middle. So the ability to model that is one of the newer features in 2016. You can also control now where the stop and yield locations are for those medians, as well as the introduction to some of the global standards, including left-hand driving for countries that use that. All right, and I'll show you an example of that shortly. So if I go back to let's bring up this tutorial. And let me go find some empty space to play with, right? If I go ahead and I just use my roadway model, right? I'm going to use my roadway module. I'm going to model a roadway. And I'm going to go ahead and just toggle on something that has a median in it. So let's just see here if I can just type in median, not a bridge deck. How about an interstate with a median barrier? Right? So if I go ahead and do that and I just draw a road, you'll see here, there's my road with median. Now, if I were simply to come in here, and let me just disable some of the shadows and ambient occlusion to make this go a little bit quicker. Right? So if I were simply model another road, let's say a local road tying in, and I'll use something very simple, right? Just some frontage. Right? How Civil 3D deals now with this intersection is controlled by this section here in your palette, right? So you can see here that turning traffic to left and right, right only, will close off that intersection, right? So very useful. Going back and setting that to left and right allows you to clear up that space, all right? In addition, I can choose to extend lane markings to the intersection or not, and I have complete control over where that stop line occurs, right? So again, little things that can make the design a little bit more realistic, especially if you're trying to model existing conditions. All right. Now, as far as the bridge-related tools, you'll see a few here that I'll go ahead and I'll give you examples of. Some of the tooltips that show you in-canvas changes. So as you're making changes to the bridge, you'll see that there are a couple of things that allow me to go ahead and actually change the view so that I can actually see the bridge superstructure underneath the road deck. There's been some great new additions to the, just some of the things that are part of the new bridge layouts, as I was referring to, a new addition to a comprehensive catalog of precast girders to reflect both local standards and practices, direct control of how girder segments end, as well as being able to quantify some of the bridge superstructure and substructure quantities effectively. So let me give you a very quick demo of that, as I do realize it's about 10:45 and I do have a few more slides. Let me jump out into my bridge design and just show you some of these features. One of the ones that I find the most interesting, as you can see here, if I were to zoom in, and I select this bridge, one of the newer functions of that is, if I go into an edit mode, is the ability to toggle the deck transparency, right? That way, when I toggle the deck transparency, I can actually see the superstructure beneath it, all right? As far as the rest of the information, you'll see here that I have a pretty comprehensive ability to edit the types of girders that I have in there and whether what types of information I have regarding those types, right? So you can see you have straight versus curved. I can go ahead and see various attributes about that. So a lot of new information for those of you, and I imagine it's a small group being that I can see from the attendee list that deal heavily with some of the structural elements within InfraWorks 360. So I won't spend too much more time here, but if you'd like a personal demonstration, be sure to shoot us an email or at the end shoot, Roger a Q&A session saying you'd like to see a little bit more of this, and I'll spend some more time talking about some of the features related to not only the beams, but you see information regarding some of the substructure or superstructure elements as well. All right. So if I go to my next slide, some of the new features allow you to now also, this is more for the civil engineering team or groups that are in here. You can see that if I go back to my tutorial file, you can easily create watersheds. So I'm going to go ahead and do an area here where I know I can find some information regarding a watershed, but the delineation of watersheds and streams to a pointer road is a new feature, as well as some of the built-in analytics to calculate peak flows for that watershed. All right, so you'll see that here under my drainage tools, I can go ahead and choose to create a watershed, and as I'm logged into my 360 account, all I have to do is simply select the location, and I press enter to start the analysis of that watershed. And what what InfraWorks 360 is going to do is it's going to analyze the information based on what I've selected, whether it's a design road or an output area, and it's going to analyze the terrain, and it's going to go ahead and generate a watershed for me. Well, that's lovely. Well, let me see if I can go ahead and generate one here where I've generated one before. Go ahead and choose a point right there. And you see information here regarding how many cloud credits. Depends on the type of analysis you'd like to prepare. The higher resolution analysis that you'd like will result in consuming cloud credits. And again, there's a whole white paper on Autodesk's website that details out which of the features consume cloud credits and how many cloud credits are consumed by those features. And if I go back, you can see here's my watershed for that entire area. And you'll see that information regarding that shows up in my little palette. And you can see you can start using different hydrology methods to calculate your peak flows, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Again, this is very nuanced to civil engineering. Now, bear in mind that the resultant watershed is going to be only as accurate as the model that you're using to define it. So in certain instances, for a very flat area or areas where, think urban areas, if you haven't defined your roadways and your urban features in a way that allows for that watershed analysis to be captured, you might get the similar result that I got earlier, which is to say that information isn't available to create that watershed. All right. If I go back to my PowerPoint slide, just a handful of PowerPoint slides left. Some new features to rapidly model pavement drainage have been included, as well as the ability to modify inlets and manholes after they've been added. There's an extended library of new drainage feature types, such as manholes and inlets, as well as those of you who keep a close eye on the Autodesk Labs, you might have heard something called Project Chameleon, where Autodesk put together something that allowed inventor-based parts to be added to InfraWorks 360. So be sure to look this up, get a little bit more information. Feel free to join that Autodesk Labs if you want to learn a little bit more about creating some custom inlets, grates, and underground structures. All right. If I go in here and I just bring in a quick design road, again, they just give very simple examples, right? All I have to do is bring up my drainage features, and I can calculate out, entire drainage networks based on what it is that I'd like to create. And you can see here that for that particular type, I can choose various components, right? You can see here I have a whole library of different structure types as well as different pipe types. So if I come in here into my inlets, my manholes, and then my different types of pipelines, I can go ahead and start modeling something very quickly inside of InfraWorks. And you can see here that it's placed those structures in there. And even after selecting them, I get a card that allows me to see information about that inlet, what kind of frames. That allows me to go ahead and choose that on the fly if I so want to, and influence information about the analysis for that particular type of inlet. All right. So again, some brand new features. A lot here, but certainly not enough time to describe all the features. So again, if you have a very specific interest in seeing some of the newer features specific to drainage networks within a roadway corridor, be sure to let us know. And then I do want to talk a little bit about, with the last 7 minutes that we have, some of the features that were introduced inside of the June 2015 release. That was a update via the Autodesk Application Manager. So if I show my taskbar down underneath, I go to InfraWorks, right? Everybody has their Application Manager, hopefully, running. And if I go ahead and I open that up and I go to my updates, you would see that somewhere down the line, some of my older updates include the ability to have updated InfraWorks 360 somewhere in here. Wherever it may be, you'd see that that's where you'd go and get that update. So I'm running version, I believe, about, I'd have to check the version, but this is the June release. And if you wanted, again, more information about the differences that came out, InfraWorks June release 2015, Autodesk has published a white paper about what's new specifically in that release, along with videos and a lot more detail than I could cover in an hour. So be sure to get that version if you don't have it. Some of the, I think the newest features that I think are probably the most powerful are the ability to do roundabouts and do new roadway component models. So to give you an example of that, let me simplify this type of roadway very quickly just to make things a little bit more interesting, right? All intersection types now have the ability to edit the geometry from a simple intersection to a roundabout. Now this is, again, very specific to the June 2015 release, right? So be sure to investigate that, and you can see that there are a number of settings based on the different roundabout types based on criteria set by various agencies, right? So you can see here I can go ahead and choose a particular type of roundabout and gain access to that geometry. All right, I simply go back to a typical intersection design, and you see now I have a T intersection based off of what I drew earlier. The component design, which is going to be located here on their component road, is probably my brand new latest favorite feature. This allows me to, very similar to Civil 3D, build a base road, right? So let's just say I want to have something that connects over here and add features as I need it. So if I don't want a symmetrical road, or I want to be able to add very specific attributes to that, I can, right? So this particular road here, I can go ahead and add a component, any information that I'd like to add, right? If I want to just simply add curb or a median, I can go ahead and do that to my road, right? So if I come in here and I replace that with some jersey barrier, I can. Right, so you have complete access to add components, change them as you need, as you see fit, all the while enhancing what it is that you have. And let me bring this over from my other side, right? So I can go ahead and here and just toggle different types. So let's say I want to have, more of a shoulder application there. I can, right? So very easy to model that information, add components as you need based on that kind of concept. And then last but not least, last slide, you'll see that there are a couple new features that allow you to control the drainage design analysis rules. You can set some abutment styles if you create your own bridge based off of newly realistic detailed abutments that were generated by Autodesk in Autodesk Inventor. And last but not least, you'll see that there is a traffic analyst panel that you can access via the previews. So if I go back to my home page, I just want to point out a few of the specializations that you have access to. Now, most of these on the top here, the roadway design, bridge design, and drainage design, were modules that you get to add via the subscription-based desktop subscriptions. And then you have a whole set of previews here for other things that are available for free. One of them is that traffic simulation. So if you see, if I go in here and I do a very, very quick, let me just get rid of this road. If I do a very quick analysis of this area with the last 2 minutes, I'm going to go to my roadways, I'm going to go to analysis, and I'm going to click on traffic simulation. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is just do a new traffic study and zoom out to where I was before and just do a very quick area. All right, so I can find 2 valid roads. What I can do is bring up the traffic analyst panel. Again, this is very, very nuanced information. If you do any sort of traffic studies and know how to go about and set timings for intersections and analyze either existing or proposed conditions from a traffic perspective, I'm just going to bring up that, of course, see if I can bring up that analyst panel, just so you can see what that would look like. And once you do, you can run a series of animations based off those information. Now, if I can't get that to work, I'll play you a quick video just to show you what that ends up looking like. And of course, I can't show it. So bear with me 1 second. And I thought I had an analyst panel. I unfortunately don't. But again, if you want to see a little bit more about that, just let me know. Let me just try making my roadway just a teensy bit bigger. Let me just delete this traffic study. And I'll go back and let's go find this area right here. Give you a very quick synopsis. Hopefully, again, I can do my quick traffic simulation for this area. Right? The text based on your design roads, how many intersections you may have. Right-clicking and choosing new traffic analyst panel should bring up the traffic analyst panel and just so I can show you what information resides in there. I got 2 minutes. I'm just going to point out one other quick new feature for InfraWorks, and that's again like a plugin similar to, and unfortunately I'm experiencing some technical difficulties here. One of the newer features is also something called Project Boulder, and Project Boulder does flood analysis for using an InfraWorks model. Now I have something I did here, and I'm just going to play a video, and I'm just going to scrub through that video because I know it probably is playing rather jerkily through WebEx, but I did a simulation of Hurricane Sandy on New York City using that Project Boulder analysis, right? And you can see here that this is a very sped up display, and but you can see using a digital elevation model that I pulled from a GIS website that I was able to actually pretty much see where most of the flooding occurred and compare that to what actually happened, and got some pretty great results. So I did write a blog post on that. If you go to blog.microsolresources.com and just look up, do a search by either Boulder for Project Boulder or Hurricane Sandy, I wrote a 2-part blog that goes into great detail about how to go ahead and generate that information using InfraWorks and Project Boulder.